Welcome back, everyone. We will now continue with our lectures. Next on stage is Karl Ivo Sokolov. He is a technology executive experienced in delivering complex data solutions for the enterprise. His specialties include data management, data engineering, data operations, and building effective, happy technology teams. He is managing partner at a specific group with 450 people in strong IT services, and their headquarters are in Austria, and they are present in 20 locations across Europe. Karl Ivo is also certified management account and elected IMA Austria chapter board president. You can start.
Thanks, everyone. So happy to have you here. I'm going to talk to you today about building data teams in late 23. Just to warn you, it's a highly subjective, anecdotal discussion, but I guess that's why you're here to hear that, and not like the rest you can read on Substack or in the books. Yeah, building successful data teams has always been a challenge, but now I'll give you a couple of ideas and share some experiences around thinking about this problem in the enterprise context. So if you're a startup, you're actually wasting your time until you get to become a unicorn, and then you get to have these kind of problems. But yeah, there might be something relevant for startup folks in here as well. All right, let's go right into it and start on a serious note. Now, data is a people's problem, right? And as you can see here from the mid-wit trap meme, if you're very smart or not so smart, you tend to agree it's a people's problem. And everyone focusing on particular technologies or particular processes, approaches in between. Well, if that's the only thing you're putting your bets on, then you're probably going to encounter a few issues. So it goes without saying it's a people's problem, meaning you really have to understand how your teams operate, what are they focusing on, what are they doing, and what they're interested in to be successful. Before we start, let me just kind of define a few things. Data teams, what do we mean by data teams? Are we talking about IT teams? Is it technologists? Is it really the analysts, business teams? Who are these data teams? And on the one hand, and then what are they? What's so interesting? And the talk is called the realities of 23. Like, what is the reality of 23? Yeah, I promise this is the only serious slide. Okay, so data teams. Well, what we observe, and you might, depending on your organization, you might define the data team as, focusing in, data operations or data engineering. Classical teams, we still have a lot of DBAs and Oracle DBAs and folks like that around. You might define them as data management, data governance people working on various governance challenges with data. And you can have the AI and BI teams working on reporting, machine learning, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think this kind of applies to all of them and how they work together. On the one hand, if you can imagine the business domains and product, risk, finance. My background is in banking, so this is very heavily banking influenced. But similar is in insurance and in other regulated businesses. And then there's usually some sort of central technology team, doing software development, engineering, security, operations, etc. And the data teams are kind of somewhere in between. They didn't do great during the agile era. They were didn't really fit the agile approach for various reasons. So they were neither here nor there. But yeah, this is kind of like the definition for data teams. One of these groups of people either working together or kind of being separate silos to advance the data topics. And one of the things that I focus on, and then is, as you heard at the beginning, is that data management, engineering, and operations is for me kind of the three distinct flavors, where you'd have kind of the consulting, more advisory governance role in data management, and you have the engineering teams, and data engineering, you could view it in a strict sense or kind of wider sense, developing pipelines and whatnot. But it is the engineering aspect. And operations people are really important, and people tend to forget that data operations is also a key element, not to be put somewhere in the back, but has to be kind of integrated together to to not have problems. Now, 2023, what are the things that we're observing in the market? What are things that are happening interesting to data teams? And you can disagree on that, but the way that I experience this is that there's a huge demand for data teams. We're building data teams at various companies, spawning new teams from scratch, trying to shape legacy teams into data teams, modernizing them. So the demand is there. But what's clearly different now than, let's say, from a couple of years before is that the average size of the data team, number of people working in there, is actually shrinking. And that trend is driven by, a consolidation of technology, the availability of different tools, modern data stack, quote unquote. A lot of things are driving this, but you definitely have to do more with less with your data team, especially in the context of an enterprise. Probably now is not the greatest time to go ahead and ask for like, oh, I need to hire 2 times more data people to do this and that and the other. So, however, the other trends, and this is also nothing new, is obviously people that have jumped on the cloud scene in data. For example, with the likes of Snowflake, we heard about Snowflake. It's a great technology where a lot of people are saying, well, the bills are increasing. Why? Well, it's to be expected. People are using it, etc. But a lot of these things are under review across the board, and people are figuring out, okay, how do we improve this? Because you see, companies have done. If you look at it from a CFO perspective, well, compared to 3 years ago, well, I hired a bunch of data people, spent a lot on technology, and if you actually look at the results, well, did we add all that more customers? Did we increase our profitability all that much? Like, how are we with the ROI? And it probably doesn't look all that great. I mean, if you're not in love with the technology itself, there's definitely questions that are being asked, and this is across, I think. This is a common theme across the industry right now to just try to optimize this. And data teams are having serious questions to answer about what are they doing all day, this question, what are you doing all day, to be more efficient. And so while this is true, you see the trend that some of these older technologies, and especially in the data space, like your classical on-premise databases and whatnot, all those great tools that have done a great job for a number of years, well, there is the push to modernize this, to migrate to more modern systems, but the need to argue for more investments in this fundamental data layer is there, and it's getting more challenging to get budgets across the board for this. So that's a trend now. Obviously, I think every second word you heard here is LLM this, LLM Gen AI. I love this, and because this is great for us as data teams, as industry. So there's I think we clearly see a renewed interest in this data cataloging and data governance, knowledge graphs, all those keywords. So there is a demand to do more with that. The question is, are you going to get new data teams for this? Do you have to do it on top with your own folks? Maybe retrain them, add more tooling, and increase the scope of their work. Yeah, so that's it there as well. But yeah, and this is 85% of project failing that you're reading right here. This is from Gartner. This is not me. But I think many of you can kind of share the sentiment that it seems like if you look at if you really were to scrutinize your projects over the past couple of years, you will recognize that, well, many of them haven't been really successful. If you measure the success by they were on time, on budget, went really great. So, and this is a very subjective view on this and highly generalized view of things, but let's say, think about it, the first generation of big data with like the Hadoop systems and all that, and they were great for the time, nothing against them, but they kind of failed in ROI. So this first wave of machine learning, let's say 5 to 8 years ago, well, they did not deliver across the board on the hundreds of percentages of ROIs that were promised to CFOs. Some of them did better than others, your classical churn, cross-selling, whatnot. There were a bunch of great use cases in the back office of whatever, but all in all, it didn't make the company twice more profitable. It didn't do this, it didn't work as advertised. So that was a learning, and then kind of big data lost relevance as a term. And now, after that, kind of an overlapping wave with the first generation big data teams where kind of data engineering became more centralized and whatnot. Well, they kind of failed on the change mandate. This is partly driven also by the fact that so many large enterprises tried to kind of push agile down everyone's throats, and the data team kind of voice was not really heard. So they had to be both centralized and non-centralized. And I'm going to talk about this, have a slide on that a little later. But yeah, so the change mandate by data, well, a lot was promised, and yeah, not everything was delivered. And last but not least, like this increased friction, it's not only the data team versus business, with business, but also the data team versus IT. So, you know, examples of that might be if you're producing apps or various other things where the data engineer, where the software engineers have done a few things without consulting the data team, and we heard all of those stories. So that's definitely also something that that you might want to look at, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So I do have like 4 slides addressing a couple of issues, like what to do next. Like what are things with all of that happening around? What are the practical things that you can apply? You know what? This is kind of like whether you're leading a data team or leading others who are leading data teams, like how to organize this or propose to your executives to just be more successful with your data team and actually be able to accomplish more with less. Talk a little bit about the CDO. Now, this is also a hot topic that there was used to be. A CDO used to be this great title, Chief Data Officer, and now kind of a lot of people who went into that burned themselves and jumped out after, I think the average tenure is about a year and a half. So didn't really stick around all that much, and now is seeing also a renewed push to do it correctly. Yeah, I'll talk about a little bit about central versus decentral data teams. Yeah, and also maybe a few pointers on what to do to prevent projects failing. So let's go right into it. There's a lot of text, okay? So yeah, friction is there, and probably it's not a bad thing. People have to argue stuff out, but whether you're compiling a new data team or trying to refocus your existing one, it really pays off to pick a mission, to stick to like what is it that you want to solve, and start zero-based. Like assume none of these old systems you're supporting or legacy things you've always done, you know, is needed, and ask this question from scratch, like why are you here? What are you going to solve? Are you going to solve reporting? Are you going to solve analytics? Not focus on the rest. Are you there to just do some data pipelines and let other teams kind of work with the data, so you're just doing infra? I think every data team nowadays should ask themselves that and kind of redefine their mission, and maybe 2 things. And I had to slide also the OpenAI saga because it's just so great. Like they didn't pick their mission. Do they want to be open, or do you want to be closed? Do you want to be proprietary? You want to be, or do you want to be like more like a research thing? And so on a smaller scale, this also applies to various data teams within the company that get bombarded from all sorts of departments. Okay, give me that report, create this data pipeline for me, change this and that for me. It definitely makes sense to think about this. Yeah, differentiating between the way you work in the team, between ad hoc and production-grade pipelines is very important. And it's also a basic thing that most people have, but sticking to it and saying no is really important. Like if someone needs something ad hoc but requires you to go to kind of like a production grade process, well, yeah, say no and do it differently. Now, the general theme of things is that you probably, and you either know this on your own, or the executives will tell you that you probably have too many, not too few data people. So this also puts pressure on you to really focus the people that you have on really the priorities for the business, and politely decline other requests. Which brings you also to the fact that you ideally, at this time of the industry, would like to have more generalists, or that includes, for example, looking like DBAs, very knowledgeable on very complex technology. Well, if you suddenly say you have these Oracle folks and you bring Snowflake in, well, what are these guys supposed to do all day? Well, one approach is to say, well, you just release the resources and there you go, you saved a few bucks. Well, this is wrong. These are the best people that you can retrain on doing other things within the data team to be more productive, to be more impactful, and so kind of make them to be generalists. That's definitely an option. Now, self-service analytics and self-service business intelligence, they used to be, I guess, the hot topic for a few years, and now it's kind of winding down a little bit because the reality is setting in that, it's not really needed everywhere, and the people who you think your ideal customer for this, well, they're probably already using and writing their own Python scripts and SQL code anyway. So, it really makes sense to, at this point, rethink and simplify and maybe limit your self-service offerings within a larger organization, so focus it to fewer tools that have more usage and that see more impact. In the broader theme of things, just scope down things, understand tech depth, understand whether you need to put forward to the executives or budget committees things for approval where you really that would really move the needle in terms of changing the infrastructure rather than just adding more scope, making new projects, and not really being great at anything. And everyone is going to be super happy about this, other than the executives. Well, it also used to have, like, in know your experiences, but used to have like head of analytics, head of data management, head of data governance, head of data engineering, and all of those heads of data something. You have to ask yourself, do you really need all of those heads of something? It's really gotten to a point where it's collapsing, and so maybe you have fewer heads and more actual people that are actually doing work and have more visibility and are more successful rather than parading themselves as heads of something, data something, that no one in the executive team has any idea what these guys are doing all day. So. But some of them are important, so we really don't do your due diligence, look at what they're doing, and maybe collapse it in a smart way. So then we come to the CDO, or head of data. Now, one of the interesting things, like if you were to jump to be the CDO of something, is to think about what will make this role successful and negotiate a setup that will work for you. One of the things that we've seen before is CDOs that came in almost like consultants, where they really didn't have. It was a toothless job, right? They just didn't. They were in many meetings and committees and all that, and everyone was like, "Oh, great, we'll work with you, we'll do great things," but they didn't, and they couldn't really move the needle. They did not have the organizational weight and kind of like the FTE count and the budgets and really the final say in making tough decisions. So they should just be, you should probably, in this case, they should just be consultants rather than CDOs. So obviously the best example is to have really a seat on the table. And to have a seat at the table means to report, the best is to report to the CEO, because if you report to the CIO, then the CIO is the head of data. And there's no question around it, because some of the decisions that as head of data or CDO you might have to make will cut into the playground of others, and so it makes sense to have a say at the table. But this is not the only thing. The other thing is to have skin in the game, meaning to get some actual operational responsibility, so that you not only have a seat at the table, but you actually have some people doing something that you operate. Very important to not stay as a kind of like a one-person division head who doesn't have any folks that work directly for them. And some of these things are obvious, but once you move or create such a role, or move into a role like this yourself, the first thing you should do is to just understand the shadow ITs. So kind of like you already have data teams. That's embarrassing. To understand the costs and the data flows throughout the departments. So talk with your executives, just ask them why they need a CDO, what is it that they want to accomplish with this role, and just understand what are the KPIs on which the companies run off of. It might not be the great things you think you will do as CDO because you bring all this cool technology, or you're going to do this and that. Maybe there's more obvious things that actually the executive team expects of you, and this will ensure that your tenure as CDO is longer than one reorg cycle, right? So that includes data duplication, people doing the same thing across different teams. And it is your job as a CDO or head of data to make sure that you have both the formal and informal, I guess, meetings, organizational things, to make sure that everybody that is working with data is talking to each other, and they're not all doing the same thing duplicated number of times over, right? So, so there'll be more trust between these teams, and even though whether they keep staying decentral with business or coming over to technology or however you think you should reshape that, they know what they're doing, and they talk to each other and share code and share ideas and the tools that they use. Right. So yeah, and obviously review everything. Try to hold harmless, no hurt feelings. Just try to understand what you have as data assets. Like, what are the tools, the scripts, the code, the issues that you have, and take stock of that so you know what you're dealing with. And then after you do that, make sure that the teams really understand what is it that they do for the company, why are they important. Like, if it's something like an analytics team working for marketing, they probably do know, because they have campaigns, and they can pretty much more easily measure how they contribute. But if you have like an infrastructure team, or a team managing the scheduling and orchestration of workloads, or even a DBA team, they have no clue what the company is doing. And usually it makes sense to bring them up to speed and make sure they understand how their contribution is relevant. And so with every new, let's say, season of reorganization, you get different ideas about how to organize this, right? I mean, the classical consultant thing that I could tell you is, if it's central, decentralize it. If it's decentral, centralize it. You got stuff to do. You can optimize it. But in reality, both approaches might work, depending on the company, depending on the focus of the data team. There's no single recipe that's correct, but you have to be cognizant of why a certain setup is correct or why is it not correct. And the best, once you get into a role where you have a say about how this is shaped, try to negotiate or to change it in a way that you think will set up the data team for success. I mean, the central data teams tend to be slower. You have to be friends with the head of the data team to get your requests prioritized, and that usually is a slow process, kind of with gatekeeping. But decentral teams are more expensive, right? I mean, if you have like a number of data teams, you will end up spending more money, and you have to know whether that's of value to you or not. And so one of the main theme around data people is like, data people should become more business oriented, understand the domain, know the products and the pipelines and what they're working on, but that's only possible to a certain extent, and it's incumbent upon you as a head of the data team to know what is it that this team knows in terms of the business and what is it that they don't know. Because if you make a mistake there, then you will not be able to deliver on projects that seem very small in terms of like re-engineering old pipelines or things like that, because they just don't understand the business context. Business is providing very few input to them. So you really have to know what the expertise is. It does make sense to still try to have like if it's like, okay, but if both approaches work, what is like an idea organization? Well, it makes sense to have some sort of a central tech infra team, right? Providing the platforms, dealing with access and whatnot, and have data engineers and other team members working as close as possible to the actual business to be able to provide value and to show value and to not get canceled in the next reorg cycle. But there has to be at least some types of dotted lines or reporting structures that the whole data organization is aligned around, and it could be with or without the whole agile setup that you might have. So as as a rule of thumb, with the decentralized approach, you obviously have more domain knowledge. I mean, if you keep these people with decentralized long enough, they'll see themselves as part of the business, not as part of data team. But that's definitely true. Allocated capacities, if you give some person to the marketing team and say, well, but you're going to work part-time on risk, well, for a number of weeks, and then it will not be possible anymore. So you won't be able to have this multi-purpose setup. And so just ask yourself, why do you need this team, where it fits best, and have, before you decide on some reorganization change, also have to understand not only this organizational aspect, but also keep in mind, what is the tech stack they're working on? Is it, I mean, with the old enterprises, especially my focus is in the German-speaking countries, and my clients are in Austria and Germany mainly. Now, we're still largely on-premise, and there was like a renewed on-premise push recently by a lot of organizations that have cloud first in their newest descriptions, and so that needs to be taken into account if you want to optimize this central versus decentral data organization, and also know what you do internally and what is actually a good idea to get a consultant on. We can help as well. Right, and last slide, and not going to be boring anymore with bullet points. Before, like one of the difficult in the current I guess business environment, data projects are under more scrutiny. It's more difficult to get major data projects and infrastructure projects approved. So it really helps to kind of play the other side and say, okay, why do you really need this project? Before you go advocate for it, challenge it all across the board, and make sure that everyone understands what the expected ROI is. And with some of these projects, you will not be able to get an ROI. It'll be qualitative. It'll be like, we believe it's just capability building. And it makes sense to, even if you think that the project is approved, to actually try to get even better quality on this. Last but not least, you heard a lot talking about organization, all that, and so technology is important. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't understand the architecture, shouldn't understand the system, shouldn't understand how you're trying to collapse the tech stack to not, to be more standardized and simplified. But yeah, in case you really see this as an opportunity for a project, make sure to argue for cost avoidance and show also the cost of inaction. What will happen if we don't do this project? What will happen in a year? What will happen in 3 years? And that's why we should invest. And once we do, make sure to really track the progress. And this is actually one of the most overlooked points, is this project management within data teams and data projects, because everyone starts on a high note, but some of these infrastructure projects, they should be set up to survive 1 or 2 reorganizations. And you can only do that by saying, we're not going to be able to project manage this within the team. We are going to be very cognizant about who tracks this and make sure that we get it to completion. If we're talking about a 12 to 18 month project, it really is not straightforward. Yeah, and for what you lack in terms of business requirements and requirements, business analysis and requirements capability, just get more business people involved, or don't go into the project, or negotiate as best as you can to keep this domain expertise closer to your data team, so that the project can succeed. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks so much for your attention. You can add me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'd be happy to answer questions.